Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This is the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then Jesus said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Let's see. How does the old saying go? In this life, nothing is certain but death and taxes. And so, when the Pharisees wanted to trap Jesus, they asked him about both. If we kept reading in Matthew chapter 22, we'd hear the question about death and resurrection. But first, in today's gospel reading, they asked Jesus about taxes. Isn't it funny that 2,000 years ago, if you wanted to trap someone, to really test them, you could ask them about taxes? I guess some things never change. And so the Pharisees asked Jesus, "Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor?" Now, this was actually a tricky question in the time of Jesus. To know why, we have to remember our New Testament history. In the time of Jesus, the biblical world was ruled over by the Romans, and the Romans imposed a tax on all those that they ruled over. As you can imagine, the people didn't like paying that tax very much. Not only did they consider it an inconvenience and a money grab by a foreign power, but some considered it to be a form of religious idolatry. To have to pay money to a pagan authority, or even to have to handle the Roman money in the first place. The Pharisees knew how controversial this subject was, and so they asked Jesus, "What do you think? Is it lawful to pay this tax?" Well, the trap is set. If Jesus says, yes, it is lawful, well, then he'd be in trouble with the people. They hate the tax, and they certainly wouldn't want Jesus to show support for it. But if Jesus says it's not lawful, well, then he'd be in trouble with the Romans, who had accused him of treason or inciting a rebellion. So what does Jesus do? Well, he calls for the coin and asks whose image is on the coin. And then he says, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." So what do you think about that? Well, it's not really an answer, is it? It sort of dodges the controversy altogether. Jesus was pretty good at doing that when he needed to. But there's a mystery to Jesus' words, and wisdom too, but it's hard to pin down. Was he saying that some things belong to the emperor, or that some things belong to God? or that all things belong to God? Generations of Christians have tried to understand what it means to render unto Caesar, as the old translation said. And that's because Jesus doesn't really answer. What he does, though, is he makes his listeners stop and think. For the people who heard Jesus, heard what he said, the gospel reports they were amazed and they left him and went away. Can't you just imagine them tapping their chins and strolling away deep in thought? Despite the controversial question, Jesus kind of wiggles out of this trap. But I'm afraid his words won't let us wiggle out of this topic, this truth about giving to the emperor and giving to God. Even though Jesus doesn't answer the questions directly, we know that we have to answer these questions all the time in our lives. When we are deciding how to spend or what to share or where to give. Our life is a constant wrestling with what to give to the emperor. Whatever those emperors are, those authorities that demand things from us. What are those authorities for you that are demanding you give to them? And how do you balance those demands with your call to put God first? Well, several years ago, I heard this simple idea from another pastor about that. The idea was to take your credit card or your debit card, whichever you use the most, to take that card and to make the mark of a cross on the front of that card with a permanent marker. That was the idea. And so I did that. I put a big cross in permanent marker on my credit card. And then for months afterward, every time I took out that card to make a purchase, I was reminded of God and God's priorities for my life. And I had to ask myself if this way I was about to spend money was faithful. Putting that cross on the card didn't answer the question for me, but it did make me stop and think. Think about giving to God the things that belong to God, and how my faith influences my daily life, even the ways that I spend money. You see, I think that's the impact of these words of Jesus today. Jesus doesn't tell us what to give to the emperor and what to give to God, but his words make us wrestle with those choices, knowing that they are indeed matters of faith. So today, I put some permanent markers down here on the baptismal font. And I want to invite you, if you feel so moved, to try out that idea too. To make the mark of the cross on your card, and then see how it helps you wrestle with these words of Jesus. The truth is that God has placed his mark, his image on us. We have been permanently marked with the cross of Christ. In the waters of baptism, God has placed his name, his seal on us, so that we will live under that image and bear the name of Christ always. In love, God places his seal upon us, and that love never changes. It is given by God to guide us and assure us that we belong to God forever. Therefore, we face the challenges of this Christian life, how to live, where to give, what demands to answer to. We face those challenges as people redeemed and loved by God. And in this life, God's love is certain. Amen.